time.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to a live telephone town hall with State Senator Phil Pavlo and other residents of Michigan's 25th Senate District. Tonight we're talking about legislative activity in Lansing and issues important to all of you. This is a live, interactive telephone town hall, and we will be taking your questions for Senator Pavlo shortly. Right now we're calling other households to let them join the call, and we've got Senator Pavlo standing by to make some opening remarks. We also have operators ready to take your questions. If you have a question for Senator Pavlo, please press 0 on your telephone. You may do this now or at any time during the call. Again, welcome to a live, interactive telephone town hall with State Senator Phil Pavlo. This evening, we'll be talking about the top 3 issues Senator Pavlo has been hearing about in his office: the ET Rover pipeline and transportation funding, and the Canadian plan to build a nuclear waste facility less than a mile from Lake Huron. The Senator also wants to hear what issues are on your minds, and we have operators ready to take your questions. So again, this is a live interactive call, and Senator Pavlo is ready for your questions. If you'd like to ask one, please press 0 at any time to speak with an operator, and we'll try to find time for as many questions as possible tonight. In just a moment, I'm going to turn things over to Senator Pavlo. Again, please remember to press 0 to ask a question. So let's get started. Senator Pavlo, you've been hearing a lot of concerns lately about a proposal to build a natural gas pipeline through parts of St. Clair and Lapeer counties. What have you been able to learn about this issue, and what do you want to share with the listeners on the line?
Well, first of all, I want to welcome everybody to the call. I'm calling you from the state capitol tonight, and it's our way of reaching back into the thumb and to our districts to get a better understanding of what's on your mind. And you're right, one of the things we've been hearing a lot about in Lapeer and St. Clair County is the proposed natural gas pipeline coming from western Pennsylvania and working its way into Lapeer and St. Clair County, and then crossing the St. Clair River into Ontario. And one of the things that we want to make sure that we do is get as much information back out to the public on the proposed pipeline. And as we go forward, we're going to be setting up meetings back in the district to help residents better understand the implications of moving a pipeline through their district. So that's something we've been hearing a lot about, and we hope to hear maybe some questions on it tonight as well.
You've also been hearing a lot these days about transportation funding. What's going on with that discussion in Lansing?
Well, there doesn't seem to be agreement or full support to raise taxes on the working people of Michigan to the tune of $1.5 billion annually. One thing we have been able to do through responsible budgeting and good government has been able to invest over $850 million of new road funding without raising taxes. We've been able to do that with surplus revenue. We've been able to do that with government cooperation. That isn't going to solve the problem going forward, but what we want to be able to demonstrate is that we're responsible with your tax dollars. We're going to show you a pathway to use current savings to build roads. And if the public is ready to support another tax measure down the road, we'd certainly be willing to listen to it. But today there doesn't seem to be agreement in Lansing to do that.
And another issue that you've been getting a lot of calls and emails about and holding a lot of discussions on is this Canadian plan to build a nuclear waste dump over in Ontario, less than a mile from Lake Huron, and I know a lot of folks are very concerned about that proposal. What's the latest on your plan to put a stop to that?
Well, very clearly, the people of the Blue Water area understand the value of fresh water. And when a unilateral decision was made in Ontario to build a nuclear waste dump so close to Lake Huron, it certainly got a lot of people's attention. We've held several town hall meetings across the district, and I've even been into Ontario to Kincardine to testify in front of a joint review panel, stressing Michigan's concern, the residents' concern about this dangerous plan.
Okay, if you've just joined us, welcome to a live telephone town hall with State Senator Phil Pavlo. This is an interactive call, so if you have a question for the Senator, please press 0 to speak with an operator at any time during the call. We're going to ask some poll questions tonight and take your questions, and we're going to get started with a question about what you think Lansing's top priorities should be. The question is, what do you think Lansing's top priorities should be of these choices? Working to bring back jobs, balancing the state budget by cutting waste, or finally tackling tough problems like the dysfunction in Detroit. So to answer the question, what do you think Lansing's top priority should be? Press 1 for working to bring back jobs, 2 for balancing the state budget by cutting waste, 3 for finally tackling tough problems like the dysfunction in Detroit. I'll give this to you one more time. What do you think Lansing's top priority should be? Is it 1, working to bring back jobs, 2, balancing the state budget by cutting waste, or 3, finally tackling tough problems like the dysfunction in Detroit? And while you're registering those responses on your phones, we're going to go to our first question for Senator Pavlo. It's coming from Susan Roof in St. Clair. Susan, go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo. Susan, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Senator Pavlo, my big question is, what are we doing in the Michigan Department of Corrections as far as mental and physical health that is not being done now?
Well, one of the things that we've been dealing with in Michigan is the explosion of costs associated with incarceration. And so the state of Michigan has taken a proactive approach, and we understand that there are services that need to be delivered to our jails, and mental health is such an important one. We know that many of those inmates are there because of a lack of mental health treatment. So what we need to make sure we do is we go back into our local community mental health agencies and be able to give them the support there and catch these convicts before they become wards of the state. That's one of the key issues. But the other issue that's driving the cost of corrections is health care. And when we incarcerate a prisoner in the state of Michigan, we become responsible for their health care. So we have to look at everything from the way we deliver prescription drugs to our prisoners at the most cost-effective way to make sure we're eliminating waste and being as efficient as possible. But that's a really good question, Susan.
All right, we've got the results of our first polling question. What do you think Lansing's top priority should be? And it's 52% think working to bring back jobs should be what lawmakers in Lansing are fighting for. 40% believe it's balancing the state budget by cutting waste, and 7% finally tackling tough problems like the dysfunction in Detroit. Thanks to all of you who chimed in on that question. We're going to go to another question for Senator Pavlo. This is from Larry Schwartz in Fort Gratiot. Larry, go ahead with your question for the Senator.
Senator, why can't we go to the United Nations about this nuclear dump they want to put next to the Great Lakes? We spend all the money on the United Nations. We get absolutely nothing from it.
Yeah, one of the things, that's a good question, Larry, and it makes you wonder, who's really in charge of this issue? What we've been able to do is identify a pathway to get the International Joint Commission, and that's a very powerful international body to begin to look at this and put a halt to it. That's what we've asked President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry to do. The Michigan legislature voted unanimously to make that happen. And what's interesting, Larry, is now our federal delegation, Senator Stabenow and Senator Levin, are now jumping on board with my plan to protect the Great Lakes. So we're making movement. We need to be able to work within the powers, and I don't know if the United Nations is an alternative, but I'll certainly look into it, and I thank you for your concern.
All right, Senator, we've got a question from James in East China. James, go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo.
Good afternoon, sir. I have been receiving phone calls from a company in Washington, D.C. asking me to talk to my wife. They said she has been requesting an absentee ballot, which she has not. I have checked with the Secretary of State. What are we going to do to make sure that there isn't any more voter fraud as happened in the city of Detroit with the former mayor and the former city clerk, as well as what happened to Senator Keyes in Florida and in Ohio and Pennsylvania?
Well, that's a good point. As we move closer to the November 4th election, the integrity of our process is so critical to a democracy. What we need to be able to make sure is that the voting rights are protected. And I would just recommend to you, James, I don't know if it's if you can get on a do not call registry, but it really sounds like maybe some funny business is going on coming from Washington, D.C., and it might even sound like someone's trying to, impact the outcome of an election through maybe fraud. So I'd be very careful about that. And to any other callers that are on the line, you register to vote at your local Secretary of State. So make sure that, you understand how the process works and don't be fooled by some out-of-state telemarketer.
All right, if you're just joining us, we're in a live interactive telephone town hall with State Senator Phil Pavlo. We're taking your questions tonight, and if you have a question for the Senator, please press 0 at any time to be taken to an operator. We're going to go now to Chris Walter in Casco. Chris, please go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo. Chris, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call. I'm a resident. I live in Casco. I live on 32 Mile Road. I know Mr. Pavlov has heard this before, but it is a constant disruption. Canadian trash haulers going through the area. It's a safety hazard. It's annoying if you live on this road. It's horrible. Lenox Township, where the dump is located, where these haulers are going constantly, I'm saying probably hundreds of trucks a day. They seem to be reaping all these benefits from this, from waste management. I know they're a large company. If neighbors have gotten together and we tried to talk to them, but they're such a large company, we haven't gotten anywhere. Is there anything that can be done? Possibly put an exit in to the Pine Tree Acres off of 94 so that these haulers don't have to be going down these roads where there's a lot of traffic, a lot of residences. It's an ongoing problem. I was just wanted to make sure it got attention.
Chris, for a number of years we've been working with these waste haulers to change their route. And unfortunately, they run on economics, and if they can shave a few minutes off, that's their desire. I think they need to be taken into consideration, the residential neighborhoods that they're going through. At one time, there was kind of a voluntary agreement to shift some of that traffic onto Gratiot and also onto I-94. But I think that new contracts come up and new haulers come from Ontario, and you kind of lose sight of that. But I do know and I do remember clearly the residents along 32 Mile Road that were putting up plywood signs, being very vocal, and for a while it had an impact. But today I don't know. I'm taking your word for it that the traffic is increasing. Maybe that's a conversation that we have to begin once again on the local level. But I'll make a note of it. And we have your number, so we'll contact you when we learn something. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to Bonnie in Lakeport. Bonnie, please go ahead with your question. Bonnie, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Please go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo.
Okay. My question is, I'm very concerned about the fireworks law. I live on the lake. It has been a disaster the way it was just thrown into legislature. We have fireworks going from May all the way through September, and it's like late at night, and they are wild fireworks I actually put on a metal roof for fear of my roof burning, and I'm very concerned about the way it was just kind of thrown through. Do they ever expect to do anything about this law?
You know, there's been a couple attempts to clean up some of the language in that law. One of them was beginning to put a time when you can do that. I don't know where that effort left off. That was something they were working on in the House of Representatives. But I know that there are local communities across the state of Michigan that have come up with their own ordinances, and I think that might be a pathway to, help at least control the hours in which fireworks go off. But we get a lot of phone calls on it during the summer months, obviously, and it's a concern for sure. So I would just start at the local level and see if the township or village that you live in is moved down the path to come up with an ordinance to limit the time frame.
All right, listeners, we've got another poll that we'd like to take. We've got a second question that you can respond to with your telephone. The question is, do you support raising taxes $1.5 billion per year to fund roads and infrastructure improvements? You can press 1 for yes or 2 for no. Again, the question is, do you support raising taxes $1.5 billion per year, as has been proposed by some, to fund road and infrastructure improvements? Please press 1 for yes and 2 for no, and we'll come back to the results of this in just a minute. In the meantime, we're going to take a question from Judy in Emmett. Judy, please go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo.
Yes, I was just wondering, Senator Pavlov, if you could possibly start involving the federal government in this fight to relocate and stop the nuclear dump issue, with it being so close to the lakes. I know that Senator Levin passed a bill about a month ago that had to do with preservation of the Great Lakes, and he headed some committee, and I can't remember what it was, but it had to do with the Great Lakes. And
right.
Furthermore, we fought in this rural area of Michigan, in Emmett and Capac and the surrounding townships. They wanted to put a nuclear waste dump here, and we fought it at a grassroots effort, and we did win. I myself addressed the state senate at the time.
That's great. Judy, one of the things that we understand, and you just hit it right on the head, the grassroots has a very powerful voice when they're engaged. I can pass all the legislation that I can in Lansing, but unless the people back home can start weighing in on it, it doesn't go as far. So we started a website called ProtectLakeHuron.com, and that's a place where you can go and visit and sign an online petition and add your voice to the legislative effort that we've been working on. And we'll be sending those petitions on to the President of the United States to tell him just how Michigan feels about a nuclear waste dump on the shores of Lake Huron. So to all the listeners out there, please visit www.protectlakehuron.com and add your voice to the thousands who have already signed that petition urging the federal government to engage and stop the Canadians from building this destructive nuclear waste dump.
All right, thank you, Senator. We've got a response to the second polling question about support for raising taxes to fund road and infrastructure improvements. It's pretty overwhelming. 28% of you on the line said yes, you would support raising taxes to fund road and infrastructure projects, and 72% of you said no. So, Senator, you've got that response, and you've got the previous polling question about the top priority that folks think should be the focus in Lansing, bringing jobs back. Do you want to comment on these two?
Yeah,
topics?
it's very representative of the people that I talk to every day in the coffee shops and at the football games. Michigan's economy is beginning to recover, and the word I'm hearing loud and clear is don't throw an additional burden, whether it's a cost of transportation, on my income today because I'm just getting back to work or getting a little savings built up. What people tell me every day is that they want to make sure that government is being as efficient as possible. And at the beginning of our comments, we talked about through responsible budgeting, we've been able to put $850 million back into our road system without raising taxes. And that's what I think the people in the thumb really want to see happen. But to your first question on the survey question, overwhelmingly, our friends and neighbors and family members want to have a job. And when I came into the Senate in 2010, unemployment was over 14%. We've been able to cut that in half in just 3.5 short years. For those of you who are still searching for a job or looking for a better job, that's something that we still are trying to address. We know that we have more work to do in Michigan, but the environment has been greatly improved for our job providers. Just in the last few years, we've put 300,000 more people to work in private sector jobs. So that's a good thing for Michigan, but it also shows the results of that survey. The two survey questions were, let's get Michigan back to work and go easy on my pocketbook. And we hear that message loud and clear. So for those of you who took the time to answer the question, while I will just say it's not a super scientific poll, it is reflective of what I hear in the district.
Thank you, Senator. For everyone on the line, if you have a question for Senator Pavlo, please press 0 to talk with an operator, and we're open to any and all questions that you'd like to ask the Senator tonight. We're taking all topics. Right now, we're going to go to Lori in Port Huron. Lori, please go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo.
Hi, Senator Pavlov. I just want to address the point of taxing electronic cigarette liquid. 1.5 or 15 cents per 1.5 milliliters of liquid. If you do that, that is going to increase the cost of the liquid, and that is going to make people not want to quit smoking because that is going to make the cost of the liquid to try to quit smoking with these devices higher than the cost of a pack of cigarettes. These are an alternative to quit smoking unhealthy, lung cancer causing, that we know of, it's proven, and other breathing difficulties. Why would we tax that when it's not a tobacco product and it helps people get off of cigarettes, just like the patch and the gum? And
right.
I just don't, I'm opposed to that tax because more people can quit smoking, but if we tax this, no one's going to want to use these to quit because it's going to cost more than the cigarettes, and they'll stay on the packs of cigarettes.
Lori, that's a good point. We've been working and really struggling with how we're going to deal with e-cigarettes. They're becoming very popular. I think that what most of the public don't realize about e-cigarettes is what you explained. This is part of a smoking cessation program as well. Now, that isn't the only use for e-cigarettes because they are a nicotine delivery system, so we need to remember that. I think where the Michigan Senate has acted in terms of legislation regulating them was the first thing that we did is we recognized that they do have harmful effects if not used properly. And so we needed to make sure that kids were not going to be able to get these any easier than they would under normal nicotine cigarettes. So I think that the conversation now is moving to how do we tax them, and I think we're a little bit outside of having an answer for that, but I'll certainly take your comments and weigh those in on the conversation as it develops. I appreciate it.
All right, we've got Hillary on the line in Port Huron. Hillary, go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just would like to know what the outlook for Michigan's budget is for the public transportation for the coming fiscal year. For example, are there any plans for a train line between Port Huron and Detroit? We have high-speed Amtrak lines, of course that's at the federal level, that are currently under completion from Lansing towards Chicago, but I have no way to get from Port Huron to Detroit unless I first take a train over to Lansing and then backtrack down to Detroit.
Hillary, that's a good question because the conversation in Lansing has been really focused on, when we talk about road funding, we also have to put in rail funding. We also have to include our airports, pipelines, and our shipping and our ports. So all of those elements make up our transportation funding budget. And then we also have to take a portion of that funding out for public transportation. And so we need to make sure that we're clear when we're talking about transportation funding that it isn't just roads and bridges. I think what you're going to start to see as Michigan's economy continues to grow is you're going to see growth in those surplus funds. Now, the more people that are driving back and forth to work, vacationing in the state of Michigan, and investing in our economy, you'll see a portion of that fall to road funding and transportation funding. I think the outlook, without going too deep into my crystal ball, is most people that I talk to believe Michigan's on the right track, believe really good days are ahead of us, and they're pretty much convinced that we're not going back to the old Michigan. And so how do we as government officials properly and effectively use the limited resources that we have, and are we getting the most efficiency out of your tax dollars? So the short answer is I think our budgets are going to grow in those areas, and I think that if we're responsible, that we'll get the most mileage, if you will, out of those very precious tax dollars.
All right, Senator, we've got a question from Dick in East China. Dick, please go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo.
We've been seeing the negative ads against the governor about taxing older people's pensions and so on. Is that true? And if it is, what can we do to mitigate that to be sure we get the governor reelected?
Well, one of the things that we have to make sure that we understand when we talk about any kind of taxes, Dick, is the fact that we had a structural imbalance in Michigan, structural deficits year after year. And when I was a House member, we would always have to cut anywhere between $1.5 and $2 billion worth of funding every year just to balance our budget. What this governor and this legislature has been able to do is get really serious about that lingering problem. And so while some pensions have been taxed, we now have a very fair system where income is treated equally across all sectors. If you're working at the local flower shop or whether or not you're retired, we're talking about taxing income all at the very same rate. And what we've been able to do is also keep that tax rate on Michigan income tax within the top 10 states in the country. And so we think that we have the right plan in place, and we're seeing our economy grow and recover because of it.
Thanks, Senator. And as a reminder for all of you on the line, if you have a question for Senator Pavlo, just press 0 on your phone. That will take you to an operator who can register your question in our queue. We're going to go to Debbie in St. Clair Township. Debbie, please go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo.
Hi, Senator. I was wondering what your views on legalizing marijuana are, like they did in Colorado, which would create jobs as well as negate raising taxes by creating millions in revenue for schools, roads, and rebuilding Detroit.
Well, the short answer is I would be opposed to legalizing marijuana. In Michigan, we have medical marijuana right now, And what we're trying to do right now is trying to figure out how best to distribute it, how to make sure it gets to the people that need it and not necessarily become part of a black market, part of a drug trade. But I think what we're learning from the Colorado experience is that, yes, they have seen a windfall in tax revenues, but they've also seen a corresponding increase in expenses, whether it be law enforcement, medical, work loss. So I think the Colorado experience is still very early to deem it a success. But I think the main point here, Debbie, is that if it's going to happen in Michigan, it's going to have to happen by a vote of the people, just like it did in Colorado. I think what you're starting to see is different cities and communities are starting to put it on their ballot as a local ordinance. I think Port Huron will have it on their ballot. I know that there was an attempt to get it on the November ballot. So I think what you'll see will be a community-by-community approach to it. And in 4 or 5 years, will Michigan be like Colorado? I don't know, but I don't think that it's anything the legislature is going to tackle. But a good question. Thank you.
All right, we're going to go now to Alicia in Port Huron. Alicia, please go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo.
Hi, Senator Pavlo. Nice to speak to you tonight.
Thank you.
After speaking, you're welcome. I happen to be one of the precinct delegates for Port Huron, and I've been talking to a lot of the residents around here. And the question I finally get to ask you is, what do you think about Common Core? I know that I myself, after doing much research and talking to many people around here, it is very bad for kids. It dumbs them down, and we like to get rid of it. But unfortunately, it seems to be that I love the governor, and I'm going to vote for him again. It seems that he seems to be on track with it. What can we possibly do, and what is your stance on Common Core?
Well, I led the fight, Alicia, over 6-8 months ago in the Michigan Senate to get rid of the Common Core and get a Michigan standard in place. I believe that, education issues should be dealt with at the state level. And I believe that Michigan has a system that's strong enough where we could set up our own standards. I think local control is such a critical part of education. And do we really want to be tied to a policy that's dictated by bureaucrats in Washington? I think that as parents become more aware of what the Common Core is, that they should be engaging at their local school districts, and these school boards are the ones that set the curriculum in Michigan. So I always ask the question to parents who bring up the Common Core, and that is have you been to a local school board meeting? Have you talked with the curriculum directors? Do you really know what kind of education your children are being exposed to in our traditional public schools? So I think Michigan can do better than the Common Core, and I think we owe it to the 1.5 million students in our state to be able to deliver the most rigorous education, but also one that has a basis in local control.
Thanks, Senator. We've got another education question coming from David Wilton in Port Huron. David, please go ahead with your question for the Senator.
Hello. I'm interested in the charter schools. Are there any rules and regulations by the state on them? And why do we have to publicly fund them when they can pick their students and not have to take, like public schools do, everybody?
Yeah, David, that's an interesting question. Let me make a couple quick corrections. Our charter schools in the state of Michigan are public schools. They always have been. And they don't have a choice on their students and who they can accept. One of the things that is part of the enrollment process in a charter school is, first of all, a parent and a student decide that they want to apply for the school. And then they're part of a lottery process, and when they're selected to become in it, because many of the charter schools have limited space. So there's not a restriction on who they can take. They take kids through the lottery, including special education students. I think the last number that I looked at is well over 10% of the students in our charter schools are considered special education students as well. So they take the full cross-section of students, But let's just remember that any student that's in a charter school is there because of a choice, and it's an alternative, and it's a way to offer parents a choice in their education for whatever reason. And we educate literally less than 10% of all the students in Michigan are in charter, so it's a small part, but it's an important part of our public education system.
All right. Well, since we're on the topic of education, we've got another poll question for you listeners on the phone about education. The question is, who do you believe is best equipped to make choices about students' education? Is it 1, the federal government, 2, the state government in Lansing, 3, parents? So the question again, who do you believe is best equipped to make choices about students' education? 1, the federal government, 2, state government in Lansing, 3, parents, and you can register those responses on your phones now. And while those are coming in, we're going to take another question. This is from Joseph in K-Pac. Joseph, please go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I was interested in what was the senator's role in being a bridge to make Washington work more efficiently. What are you doing to help bring the left and the right together?
Well, Joseph, the first thing that we've been able to do was show Washington what good government looks like. We left behind the days in Michigan where we had 2 government shutdowns, and for the 4th year in a row, not only have we balanced our state budget, but we've balanced it 4 months ahead of time. We've moved our bond rating from very low to very high, thereby reducing the cost in our education system, reducing our cost to local government units. So what we've been able to do is hold up the Michigan model to Washington and say, with the right people and the right outlook and approach, you can balance the budget. Michigan does it. But I think more than that is we have a strong working relationship in this office with our Congresswoman Candace Miller. And I think that one of the things we've been able to do with Congresswoman Miller has been able to talk specifically about the challenges that we see in the thumb, at the same time using her influence in Congress to tell that story. And I think when we look at road funding and some of the agriculture advances that we've had that have come from the help of Washington, that's just good representation. But to your point about bringing the left and the right together, that's people. That's people that can do that. We just want to be able to hold Michigan up as an example of saying, here's what happens when reasonable people are set and elected to govern. But that's a great question, Joseph.
Senator, we've got responses to your latest poll question. What do you believe, or who do you believe is best equipped to make choices about students' education? 80% of folks on the line believe it is parents, 15% believe state government in Lansing, and 5% the federal government. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's happened with parent choice in the state of Michigan recently?
Yeah, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've been able to offer more alternatives to parents and students in Michigan. And sometimes I scratch my head and say, how did we get away from it? What were the powerful influences that restricted choice for our parents and students? So now we've been able to offer, here's an example, dual enrollment. We all know how expensive college can be. Students are accumulating enormous amounts of debt, and they're ultimately getting to the point where they're making a decision, are they going to continue on with their education? So we looked at it, took a very deep look at it, and figured out, why don't we expand dual enrollment? And that is allowing our high school students that are capable of learning at a higher rate or at a faster rate the ability to earn college credits while they're still in school. And I can tell you that kids are graduating in St. Clair County not only with a high school diploma, but many of them have up to 30 credits of college already in their pocket when they leave high school at the age of 18. That has a huge impact on how quickly they can enter the workforce. It has a huge impact on a parent's and a student's budget. That's a year or 2 worth of college that they don't have to go and borrow. So, I mean, it's been a realignment of resources to be able to direct it where the needs are. But I think it's really important to understand that local control is so powerful in Michigan, yet many people don't really realize how powerful their voice can be. By being on this call tonight and weighing in on the fact that you believe parents should be in charge of the education decisions is a very important step. And we're working on that in Lansing. We want to be able to offer as much choice, option, and whether it's flexible times, whether it's online learning, dual enrollment, these are all tools that help quickly educate a workforce and targeted education that allows these young people to get paid.
All right, Senator, we've got time to fit in just a few more questions before we conclude tonight. We're going to go to Don in Marysville. Don, please go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo.
Thank you for taking my call. I'm calling about an article that was written this past Sunday by Mike Wallace in the Times-Herald paper. And I'll just read you a paragraph. It says, the change in the DHS rules not only came without notice to Medicaid applicants and DHS workers, but came without any public hearings and without anyone being able to comment on the rules changed. According to the county DHS worker, Lansing claimed these changes to Medicaid rules and policies were not a change in policy and that they were just implemented in existing policy. And this has to do with the changes to the spousal nursing and home Medicaid qualifications and how it's going to affect, seniors.
Mike, that's a great point. And for all the listeners that are still on the call, I'm about to give you some information that, you probably heard before. When Obamacare became the law of the land, it put into question every medical funding program that was there. And Medicaid in the state of Michigan was one of them that has seen massive disruption. It was just back in October that over 430,000 people in the state of Michigan were now new recipients of Medicaid health care. When you insure nearly 500,000 new people in a short amount of time, it's going to disrupt the workflow and the cash flow in these programs. Unfortunately, a lot of good working local programming was impacted by it. And I will tell you that as long as I'm in politics, we'll be continuing to sort this mess out. We had nearly 225,000 people that lost their coverage in the state of Michigan. And if you're one of those people, I feel bad. I feel that, you've been done a disservice with this new health care policy. But just know that we're going to work to try to iron it out. And I think that as we go forward, we're still probably years away from fully implementing all the rule changes that come not from your doctor, not from your health care providers or hospitals, but from bureaucrats in cubicles in Washington, D.C. that don't know you or don't know your circumstances. So just know that we're working to sort this out, but this has been a very disruptive health care policy change.
All right, we're going to go to Zylata in Port Huron. Zylata, please go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo. Zylata, are you on the line? All right, I think we'll go to a next question. We've got Billy in Port Huron. Billy, please go ahead with your question for the Senator.
Hi, Senator Pavlov. First, it's just a quick question. I wanted to find out if you voted for right to work.
Yes.
Okay. My next question is about Lyme disease. I would like to know if there is currently any type of legislation to help change how it's looked at in the state with, insurance companies and so on, because it is extremely difficult to get care for chronic stage Lyme. And also what you had touched on with the new changes in Obamacare and affecting Medicaid recipients. I was never actually a Medicaid recipient. I had a spin down, even though I'm on disability and receive Medicare. It has affected me in many ways. But my main concern is there legislation for Lyme in Michigan?
There isn't, and having had a family member that's gone through the diagnosis of Lyme disease, it is very hard to diagnose, first of all. Second, it requires not just one specialist, sometimes a handful of specialists to finally pin down what Lyme disease is. This isn't like diagnosing a fever. And I think that one of the concerns is your access to health care and your access to these specialists that are leaving the state of Michigan because of the new Affordable Care Act. One of the things that has had an impact, and if you've had Lyme disease, you understand how destructive it can be. People live in constant pain, joints, skin irritation, yet it's hard to diagnose. So I understand that. To your point on the spend down, that was one of the things that caught our mental health community off guard. Because the people, we need to make sure that in Michigan, as we deliver health care, whether it's health care or mental health care, that we're taking care of the most vulnerable people that can't take care of themselves. Those programs, unfortunately, were the ones that were immediately impacted with the Medicaid expansion. So as we work, it's going to take a while to get those programs reinstated, but we have to be looking out for the most vulnerable citizens in our society, and many times that falls on the mental health side of our equation. But to your point, there's no specific legislation designed to address Lyme disease.
All right, we've got time for one final question tonight, and if we weren't able to get to the rest of you who are in the queue, we apologize. We'd ask you to call the Senator's office at 517-373-7708 or visit him online at senatorphilpavlo.com, and his staff can certainly help with questions after this call. For our final question, we're going to go to Elaine in Casco Township. Elaine, please go ahead with your question for Senator Pavlo.
Good evening. I was just wondering if there is any current action in Lansing on reinstituting the homestead tax credit for seniors?
No, that isn't a part of a conversation. I will tell you that in April, while we were looking at a budget surplus, that was certainly one of the issues that we were talking about, going back and finding an equitable formula to reinstate part of that homestead tax. But what we had to do, what we ended up doing with that surplus, and just so you know, that surplus is your tax dollars, it became very evident that the terrible winter that we had, our roads and our local road agencies that put the salt down and plow the snow from these roads, they incurred an enormous amount of overtime and additional salt. So a lot of that surplus went back to our local communities. But here's, I think, where we're going, Elaine, in Michigan, and that is our growing economy is going to give us flexibility to start to return some of these hard-earned tax dollars back to the people that have paid in. And I think over the next several years, we'll have a lot more budget flexibility, and we'll be able to address some of these issues and give a little bit more tax relief to the people who have been paying their way for a lot of years.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes tonight's telephone town hall with Senator Phil Pavlo. We thank you all for your time, and Senator, thank you for your time as well. If you'd like to reach the Senator, the phone number again for his office is 517-373-7708, or you can reach him at his website, which is www.senatorphilpavlo.com. And for more information about the Canadian Nuclear Waste Dump, you can visit protectlakehuron.com. Again, thank you for joining us, and have a good night.
Thank you.